Learn Persian with Chai and Conversation. ابن Yamin's آن کس که بداند و بداند که بداند. Introduction with Alan Eyre. All right. Well, Alan Eyre, thank you so much for being on our poetry program again.
I'm honored and surprised, frankly, to be invited back.
We got really good responses to our last poetry episode. So if you haven't listened to our last one, we did Khayyam's Rendi Didam, and Alan gave a whole introduction to his love of Persian poetry and himself and all that. So
What, love of myself,
yeah, love of himself.
love of Persian poetry, and myself.
He talked about how much he loves himself and how poetry led him to that self-love. It's very important. So everyone go back and listen to that. But Alan also on his Instagram posts a lot about books that he's reading, and he always reads these very doom and gloom climate books. I guess they're not doom and gloom, they're just reality. And so I wrote him recently and said, how do you deal with this, and do you not just feel a sense of despair? And he messaged me back with this poem, and I said, let's talk about this poem. So that's where this is coming from.
Oh,
So just as a brief intro, tell me, so you said in your message that you were obsessed with Iran, and now you've transferred that obsession to climate. So can you talk a little bit about that and what you've been doing with this obsession?
yeah, it's I'm not a psychologist, but yeah, it really was. I mean, pretty much from when I started learning Persian, that I think we talked a little about last time, until like 2016, it's all I did. You know, books, this all my free time. It really, I just loved it, and I still do. But starting around 2015, 2016, I started reading more, not about climate. Actually, I was reading a great book by a guy called Colin Tudge, The Time Before History. And he talked about how, we talk about history, but actually ancient man, what we call ancient man, people in ancient Rome, that's relatively recent in the sense that we've been around for like 300,000 years. Civilization only started about 12,000. So anyway, this started me on this whole thing of looking into anthropology and the history of humankind. And then I read a book, The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells, about climate
Right.
change. And you just realize that we're a species amidst the innumerable species on the earth. And what we've done, especially since 1945, is starting to change the biophysical systems that regulate the incredibly stable climate we've had, which has allowed civilization to flourish. So it's this, I think someone testifying before Congress about 30 years ago said, we're conducting a vast experiment, the consequences of which will affect the lives of our children and their children. So anyway, yeah, I started spending all my free time reading about issues relating to climate change and tampering with these sustainable cycles that govern how we live and how we flourish. And it's been, yeah, I mean, there is a doom and gloom aspect to it, but also this is not written stone. We can change this. And the first step is education and becoming aware.
Right. Yeah, I've just been seeing all the titles, and I live in Texas, and things have really changed here. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
been it's been a difficult few years. We had I don't know if you heard about it in 2011. We had this horrible summer where my husband is reading The Ministry of the Future right now.
It's a great trilogy.
Yeah, did you read that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh my God.
Well, it starts off, I'm afraid to read it, but it starts off talking about how this sun, like looking at the sun and it being this like harbinger of doom.
Yeah,
And I felt that summer, like, the sky was clear, it was blue
yeah,
all summer, and then you just see this sun coming up, and you couldn't hide from it. There was just nothing you could do about it. It was very scary, I have to say.
oh my God. Yeah, yeah,
It was a scary, and, you always hear about, like, seasonal depression with, like, when it's cloudy outside, but this was, like, a depressing sun. I
yeah. No, that's
so
a great trilogy. And also, what a great idea having a part of government that looks out for future generations, because no one's doing that now.
Right, right. Well, so in response to my inquiries about how you feel right now, if you feel a sense of despair, you said, "No, I don't feel despair. We need to do something about it. We need to know about it." And you sent me this poem, which immediately reminded me of the old Donald Rumsfeld
Yeah.
quote.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd start with reading that if it's not too political. Those who are around a couple decades ago will remember this very well. It made a lot of ripples in the in the world. Everyone was talking about it, and I wonder if you got it from this poem. So I'm going to start off with that. He says, "Reports that say this isn't too political, is it? Is it okay to talk about this?"
Not at all. Goodness no. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so reports that say that something hasn't happened are always interesting to me because, as we know, there are known unknowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know, but there are also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know. And if one looks throughout the history of our country and other free countries, it is the latter category that tends to be the difficult ones. Okay, so he said that
Ah,
and it was
ah.
used to just yeah, it was used to justify a lot of things that ended up being, dumb and not true, basically. But that's where we'll leave that. If other people want to know more context about that quote, you can go check it out. But I thought that would be an interesting spot to start, our discussion on this poem. So do you think he read that poem and he got that directly
I
from the poem?
I think, when you get to be a certain age, you sort of perforce gather a certain minimum amount of wisdom, and you realize that there's stuff you don't know that you don't know, and there's stuff you don't know and you don't know you know it. I think it's called like Knightian complexity or something like that. It's just there's different types of ignorance.
Right. Okay, so should we get right into the poem?
Bedim, where are we at? You are nice enough.
Okay. So you're gonna read the Persian and I'm gonna read the translation,
Okay, so are we doing it chunk by chunk, or am I reading the whole Persian and you doing the whole?
sentence by sentence.
Okay, here we go. We're starting the poem, but we got to say who it's by, for goodness sake.
Yes, you're
Russia.
right. Let's give context of the poem. Who
Okay,
is it by?
perfect.
And I just have like the Wikipedia of it, so I don't know if you have more information that
You and me both. And there's lots of different versions by different people, but this is the one that I know.
so this is Ebn Yamin,
Yep.
right? Is that how you pronounce it?
You're asking me. You're the one native Iranian, for goodness sake. Yeah.
I know I should know. But
Hey, that's another good thing to say. Alt K hast Hayamon Botele. Do you know that one?
no.
Yeah. Where there's water, you don't need to clean your hands with sand, because in Islam, if you can't clean your hands before prayer with water, you do it with sand. And so if there's water, which is you don't need sand, which is me.
You're you're the expert on this one. Well, this is a poet that I'm not familiar with, but he
I mean, I don't know him either. Yeah, yeah.
okay, so he is from Khorasan, which is
It's from Semnon, actually. It's right now present day Semnon area, Shahrud. Yeah,
mm,
Mardumak, I think, right, or something like that.
well, it says
Yeah,
that it's part of portions
yeah,
of Iran and then
yeah,
Afghanistan, northeastern Iran.
yeah.
The eastern halves of Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, western Tajikistan, portions of Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. But he was a Persian speaking poet from 1286
Mhm.
is when he was born. So, like a lot of these poems, they're so old, but we can still understand the language, which is incredible.
Yeah,
Um, and then at a young age, he became interested in becoming in poetry because his father was also a poet. And following his father's death, he became the court poet.
yeah.
So he was basically paid to write poetry, which is amazing.
Great gig if you can get it, yeah. I don't think we have that anymore in
Exactly.
the US government, you know? Well,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
we had
that's
the
right.
national poet, so but that's
But yeah,
uh,
these were paid thinkers of the time.
wow, thought leaders.
So yes, so that's a little bit of history into him, and I'm sure we'll have more on the website where you can read more about him. But this will be the first poem that we've done by him, so I'm excited.
Me too. Are we ready? We doing this?
Let's do it.
Okay, I'll start off. Uncas ke bedonad, va bedonad ke bedonad,
One who knows and knows that he knows,
as be kherad, as gumbad gardun bejehonad.
his horse of wisdom will reach the skies.
Uncas ke bedonad, va nadonad ke bedonad,
One who knows but doesn't know that he knows,
آگاه نمایید که بس خفته نماند.
He is fast asleep, so you should wake him up.
Uncas ke nadonad, the bedonad ke nadonad,
One who doesn't know, but knows that he doesn't know.
langon charake chish be manzel berosonad.
His limping mule will eventually get him home.
Uncas ke nadonad, the nadonad ke nadonad,
One who doesn't know and doesn't know that he doesn't know.
dar jahle morakab, abad oldar bemonad.
He will be eternally lost in his hopeless oblivion.
Bah, 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 bah.
All right. Okay, so initial thoughts. So
Is it a battle dar or a battle door? Anyway, we'll leave that one. I think could, but I think it's a battle dar.
we'll clarify later. So as we do in
Yeah,
these in this one, we're just going to talk about the general
yeah,
ideas and some of the individual words that I'll go through this poem line by line. We'll have 2 more lessons on this poem where we'll go over it line by line and learn all the words.
okay, good.
Yes, so don't worry, listeners, we'll get all of it straight. But right now, we'll just talk about the general poem and a few interesting things about it. One of which, it's so, in a lot of these Persian poems, it's so interesting when you translate it, it becomes so clunky because we're using just these very simple words like bedānad and nadānad. So, first, let's go over those 2 words that show up over and over again. What is bedānad?
Yeah. It all comes from Dunistan, or in colloquial Persian, Dunistan, like midunam, I know. It's to know. So, yeah, it's a basic verb. Dunistan,
To know, and
yeah,
then nadānad.
to not know. So they're both a
That's right.
subjunctive form of to know, like third person singular, he who knows and doesn't know. Yeah. So,
So yeah, so all of that, so we can just take one who knows, we can just condense it to "Kesi ke bedonad,"
right,
someone who knows.
right.
So we don't need I'd say we don't need as many words. But the whole poem is constructed around these 2 things of donistan and nadonistan.
Right,
So knowing and not knowing.
right.
So with that, I thought let's go through each 2 lines and kind of go through it
Sounds good.
more.
I like this.
Okay, so for the first 2 lines again.
Uncas ke bedonad, the bedonad ke bedonad.
So on cas que bedonad va bedonad que bedonad.
Uh-huh.
So cas is a person.
Right, right,
And we always talk about how in Persian it's gender neutral. So we don't have to say in the English, they actually default to he in this translation, of course. But we're not specifying whether this is a man or woman. On cas is one, like that person,
right. One who knows. Yeah, yeah. Or that
one who
person,
knows.
because on is that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Que bedonad va bedonad que bedonad. So
That person that knows and knows that he knows. So you've got the same verb 3 times in the same sentence. The first is present and the next 2 are subjunctive, you know? Yeah,
love it. And what is the fate of that person?
yeah, okay. So, اسب خرد از گنبد گردون بجهاند.
His horse of wisdom will reach the skies.
Yeah, yeah. Which is literally the dome, Gombad, of fortune or fate. Gardun, like destiny.
Okay, so that is the best of all worlds. So one who knows and knows
Okay.
that he
Right,
knows.
right. Okay, we going on?
Let's do it.
Uncas ke bedonad, vanadonad ke bedonad.
So one who knows but doesn't know that he knows. So bedonad va nadonad ke bedonad.
Mhm.
Okay, so what is an example of that? So a person that knows but doesn't know that he knows. So what is that?
That's just someone who is unaware of his good fortune in knowing or her good fortune in knowing, right? So there's no ignorance, but there's ignorance of knowledge. So, and, and the way this poem works, it goes from the best possible case sort of to the downwards to the worst possible case. This is why, like, for the first, third, fifth, and seventh line, they're all variations where they're just changing a variable. You know, he here, he knows or she knows or he or she doesn't know. And then it plays off of that. So the fun lines are always the second, fourth, sixth, and eighth.
Right. But then this person, so they have the innate wisdom,
Right.
but then they're not aware of
They
it.
don't realize it. So they're not able to sort of use it.
Got
It's
it.
like having, riches that you can't access because you don't know you have them. So,
Got it.
Yeah.
So what is the fate of this person?
Fate of this person is Ogonamoid. Okay, bas kofte namonad. So needs to be aware, like wake him up, literally. Ogonamoid. Nemoid is you should, right?
Yeah, let him know. Let that person know.
Let him know, yeah. Tell him or her, so he doesn't sleep anymore, you know? So
Right.
bas kofte namonad is like he slept enough. He shouldn't be sleep anymore, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, wake up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then we go then this is who I associate with. This is, I think, the reason I sent it to you. This is the one I always quote from this poem. Every poem usually has what's called a shahbait, which is like the
Mhm.
best part, or the part that everyone knows, and then there's other parts. So to me, this is the shahbait, the best part, the part that I use the most. Uh Uncas ke nadonad, va bedonad ke nadonad.
Okay, so one who doesn't know, but knows that he doesn't know. So it's willful ignorance
No,
is what we're
this is
saying.
the one who is aware of his ignorance, not willful in the sense that you want to be ignorant, but he
Got it.
realizes he or she doesn't know, right? Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So then this next part, this is what confuses me a little.
yeah. Langon charake chish be manzel berosoned. Which and it's here again, they say harak, which is the K makes it the diminutive. Har, as we all know, is donkey, right? So
Right.
harak is like little donkey. So not only is it a donkey, it's a little donkey, and it's limping. Langon is like limping, lang.
Right.
So it's like his limping mule will eventually get him home. So this is the part I like the best, which is if you're ignorant and you realize you're ignorant, you'll get there somehow. It's not you won't get there like, riding a Benz, with bells and whistles, and smoke bombs and dry ice, but you'll get there, you know?
But how? I don't that's the part that I don't understand.
Because you know that you don't know, which is the first step.
Ah,
This is the whole, this dichotomy plays all throughout. And again, I'm not a Persian scholar, we know that. But this is one of the why I like Persian poetry. There's this playful dichotomy between, ignorance and knowledge, and sort of if you're aware you're ignorant, that is in itself is a type of wisdom.
got it.
As opposed to, you can't fill a full glass, right? You have to
Right.
realize you're empty. So it's like that last poem, Rendi Didam, It's like this person has nothing, but he's, that is his power. So awareness of your ignorance, it all relates to, oftadagi, to tavazu, to humility. If you're
Right.
humble, they have a great saying in Persian, "Uftadagi omuz agar tolebe." I went into the whole thing, but basically, be humble. Water never flows to the high point. It goes down to the low point.
Right. I think that the reason I was confused is because I was thinking it's willful ignorance, and now you corrected. It's not that. So one doesn't know, but knows that he doesn't know. So if you want to get home eventually,
Yeah,
you have to have that realization of like, I don't know, because then you can do
yeah,
something
yeah,
about it.
exactly, exactly.
Got it.
What do they say? I remember that the old Zamona Shah, the time of the Shah, they said, "Tavono bovad herke dono bovad." You know, you can do it if you know, but if you don't know, you can't do it. So the first step is knowing if you know or you don't know.
Got
Yeah, yeah.
it. Okay.
Okay, now comes the gruesome part. Are you ready? Put like a
Yes.
parental warning on this part. Uncast kenadonad, vanadonad kenadonad.
Oh, one who doesn't know and doesn't know that he doesn't know. And I want to, again contrast this with "On kas ke bedānad va bedānad ke bedānad." So one who knows and knows that he knows. So bedānad, bedānad, bedānad. Now this is we've reached the, iteration of "On kas ke nadānad va nadānad ke nadānad." One who doesn't know and doesn't know that he doesn't know, and that's Donald Rumsfeld's Unknown Unknowns. So, yes.
And it's also the worst possible case. This is again sort of relating in the Persian context. Someone who is, very prideful and boastful and is so full of himself or herself, and they, maghrur, just arrogant.
Yes.
So if you don't know and you don't know that you don't know, and here comes the bad part, dar jahle morakab abadal dah bemonad.
He will be eternally lost in his hopeless oblivion.
And jahl, as we know, is ignorant. Jahl murakab is perfect ignorance. It's absolute ignorance. It's like you can't get more ignorant. So that's not a good
Right,
place to be. And
right,
Abadul Dah, again, these are all, this bottom line is all, Arabic root words. Um, Abad is his infinity. That is like fate or destiny or time. So it's like forever, eternal.
right. Right. Although, yeah, the part that I kind of, am wondering your thoughts on this, like, there's also a, Persian saying where if someone is asleep, you can wake them up, but if they're pretending to be asleep, then you can't wake them up. They're pretending. So then there's, the "An kas ke nadonad va bedonad ke nadonad," to me seems like the worst case because they know that they don't know and they're not necessarily doing anything about
No,
it.
no, no, because I mean, they're aware of their condition. That's not like they're not choosing it. They just know that they don't know.
Right,
The
right, right,
beginning of
right,
all knowledge is ignorance. You can't
right.
fill a full glass. So, I mean, to me, the bottom four lines are, you have two people who are ignorant. One knows he's ignorant, and because he knows that, there's a way out. But if
Right.
you don't know you're ignorant, right, then you're
Yes.
stuck there forever.
Yes. Although, but with climate change, like,
Yeah,
there's so many climate change
yeah, yeah,
deniers. I mean, the data is out there,
yeah.
right? So, a lot of people know that they don't know. Do you think that they will get there eventually, or is it just they're not gonna you can't wake them up because they're pretending to be asleep?
Yeah, no, I think at this point, everyone who pays attention to the issue knows it's real. There is a certain small minority of people who deny it's a real thing, but we don't need to convince those people in order to take action. Sort of, you don't have to convince everybody as long as you get a consensus. And polling shows, most people, I think, or yeah, at least a sizable minority, are aware of climate change. I mean, to me, this is like cancer, cigarettes causing cancer, or people who believe in flat earth. There's still a few
Right.
people out there, but instead of channeling your energy into convincing those people, it's more like mobilizing those people who are aware of the problem so something can be done.
So in what ways have you kind of mobilized or what do you recommend or is there like books that you recommend people to read? Because what is there I understand what you're saying, but then it seems like if there's not action at the top, which I'm feeling like
Yeah,
it's not hopeful that there's going to
uh-huh.
be action at the top, like what is it that the individual person can do? And why isn't like if everyone agrees, why isn't there action at the top?
Yeah. It's funny. I took when I was still a diplomat before I retired. I took a week-long class at the Foreign Service Institute, which is the State Department's own in-house sort of university or college for teaching different things. And it was a class a week or two on climate diplomacy. And now, a lot of the talk is about that. How do you talk to people about this issue? Because, you look at these reports that come out by international federations of scientists or thing, the IPCC, it's called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they've been coming out for decades
Right.
documenting where we are, but, most people don't read them. But, they said it's like, because when you're talking public diplomacy, you always talk three, right? So the three key points are it's real, it's us, meaning it's actually there's 4 points. It's real, it's us, it's serious, but there's something we can do about it. And so everything is sort of organized around that matrix. So it's real, like I said, check that box, right? So it's real and it's us. I think that's already been done. And it's serious. I think more and more people are realizing how serious it is. The book that really turned me on to how serious it was written by a guy who's now a reporter for the New York Times called Davis Wallace Wells, called The Uninhabitable Earth. And again,
Mhm.
it just talks about the consequences of escalating heat and climate change. And it's funny, I tell people it starts like a Stephen King novel.
Oh,
The first sentence is, "It's so much worse than you think." And then he goes on to describe it. And he's gone on to sort of modify his original thesis. He wrote an article in, I think, the New York Times Magazine a couple of years later saying, actually, worst case scenarios are better than they were due to the limited action we've taken. But still, I think, and this is where ignorance and awareness comes in, I do think most people are unaware of the severity of the consequences of what we call climate change, which is actually not just climate and increase the amount of dioxide in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases, but a whole other range of issues like acidification of the ocean, chemical pollution, decreasing biodiversity, all those things. There's like 9 systems that are sort of commonly referred to, geochemical systems that we call climate change. So,
Okay.
yeah, the severity is, and we're already seeing that now. If you look at, I mean, pick up every paper and turn to page whatever. Like I was reading an article the other day about pollution in New Delhi and how bad it
Right.
is.
Right. But have and despite all this, like, being where you are, you see action taking place?
No, not at all. No, I mean, not yeah, sorry. No, I mean, for example, right now they're having COP29. COP29 is the conference of parties, and a 29 means it's the 29th annual one. It's happening in Baku, Azerbaijan every year. I mean, it's funny because this is literally every year governments from every country in the world meet to figure out how to address climate change, right? That
Right.
should be like front page, right? You think? No, it's not. And most of the time, not much action has come out of it. We all know that we talked about the one in 2015 in Paris, where the world agreed, though in a non-binding way, to limit pollution to under 2 degrees Celsius. I mean, to limit the projected increase in global warming to 2 degrees Celsius and ideally 1.5.
Right.
Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, we've already gone up on globally on average of I think 1.1 or 1.3. So,
Right.
bad things happen for every tenth of a degree. The consensus back when they did this was that 1.5 is really you don't want to go past there. But if you have to, maybe you go to 2.0 degrees Celsius. But the higher you go, the more you risk getting into tipping points, which worsen the climate in a nonlinear fashion. So anyway, right now we're having, I think tomorrow's the last day, Friday, COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. It
Right.
seems to be the case that people are having trouble agreeing on what to do.
Wow. And despite all that, I've asked you this question many times of if you feel despair and you said no because why?
Because we don't have the luxury of despair.
Right.
Hope and despair come after sort of realizing the situation, right? If you're diagnosing a patient, the primary thing is a good diagnosis, right? How you feel about that diagnosis, that's another issue. And to my mind, we owe it to the future, the ministry of the future. We owe it to untold future generations not to screw up this beautiful atmosphere or this beautiful climate that we've had, since 12,000 years ago when we emerged out of the last ice age or little ice age. We're now in what's called the interglacial period, where there's far fewer glaciers on the earth and far less ice. And the climate stability of this last 12,000 years, very little range in global annual temperature, has
Wow.
allowed agriculture and has allowed civilization to flourish. But when those patterns get changed and when the climate ranges and the functioning ecosystems that have created this climate stability over the last 12,000 years, if they change, then it gets a lot harder for us to live. Agriculture gets harder, cheap food gets harder, weather patterns change. Certain places become unlivable. Southern Iran, for example, you look at the temperatures in the summer there, it's ridiculous. So you're starting
Yeah.
to see people moving to northern parts of it, right?
Right.
Middle East, we talk about climate change and global averages. Middle East is rising just like the poles, far more than the global averages. So the Middle East is already incredibly hot. And when you consider
Right.
that 17 countries in the Middle East are already water stressed, they don't have enough water, gets hotter, less water, desertification, more deserts. This is it's not a place you want to be.
Right. How was your experience living in Dubai? Like what was that like? I've never been there, but that's
You've never been to Dubai, you gotta
yeah.
go. It's a I mean, it's a great place. I mean, it's People go, you just say to me, "Oh, it's so artificial." And I'm like, "Yeah, but that's not a bad thing." I mean, it's its own
Right.
natural. I mean, Dubai has a certain physical reality, and they've made the best of it. Now, the problem is that it requires tremendous energy to do that. And,
Right.
those countries in the Persian Gulf, like the UAE, United Arab Emirates, and, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, already they're freakishly hot. They don't have
Right.
enough water, they have to desalinate. But Dubai was wonderful. The beaches were warm. I mean, again, the summer gets incredibly hot, and this was, I left there in 2013. It's
Right.
it's those places will become, without intervention or adaptation, unlivable for a large, certainly for anyone who works outside. And this is why when you talk about climate change, there's 2 key functions: adaptation, which is getting ready for what's gonna happen, and mitigation, which is trying to make it better by decreasing the amount of carbon dioxide we put in the atmosphere.
Right. But I guess there's like I do hear in terms of hopeful things, like we managed to all pull together for the ozone. We managed to save bees. That's a recent thing.
Wow, I missed that headline, the bee saving one, really?
Oh yeah, that's the wild thing. It's there was so much talk about the bee collapse, and actually, I guess beekeepers have all come together, and there's been like small beekeeping, like backyard beekeeping done, and now that problem they say it's reversed.
Well, if that's true, that's great because bees are essential to the food chain. We don't wanna
Exactly.
be around on
So
a planet where bees don't pollinate.
yeah, so I'm hoping that it'll all be just like that, where we reach the edge and then we
But and again, I don't wanna rain on your parade here. You talk about about the ozone depletion. That was pretty simple. That was one chemical, class of chemicals, chlorofluorocarbon,
wow, right,
CFCs, for which there was an easy substitute. It's like taking artificial sweetener because you can't use sugar. It was pretty easy to swap out, and that was a triumph. The world got together, realized that there were these ozone holes, which allows dangerous ultraviolet rays to come down, and they, acted together in collaboration, and to a large extent, fixed it with the Montreal Protocol and all that stuff, 1971. But fossil fuels, right? They're the
right,
backbone of our modern civilization, not just fuel, but, petrochemicals, plastics, still over 80% of all our energy use is, fossil fuels. And sure, the amount of renewables are going up, solar power is getting cheaper. The number one state for alternative energy, you're living in it, Texas, wind,
right.
solar, but that's being added on to use of solar of petrochemicals, of fossil fuels, not taking its place. So that's what we do.
Okay. So relating back to our
Yeah.
poem, I still don't quite have the hope that like if a lot of the people are in the category of "On kas ke nadonad va bedānad ke nadonad," I still go back to I feel like the knowledge is all out there for people to get, but they don't want to know.
But it's like they
So,
say, "Nardabone pele pele," you know? It's like every
yeah.
little bit helps, This is not a thing
Okay.
where tomorrow we're gonna wake up and, "Oh, we've won." This is gonna be a generational effort,
Okay.
it's gonna be changing the mindset of people, and it's trench warfare. You do it a person at a time, an idea at a time. You don't vilify your enemy. You talk to him or her. You listen to them, as importantly. This is it's not like well, there are, but it's not primarily evil people who realize that they're befouling the future but want to make money. There's a lot of that going on in terms of corporate interest, but there's also just priorities. I mean, people need to make a living, right? They're more concerned about how much it costs to fill their tank of gas of their tank of, than they are about what's going to happen, 50 years from now. And our political structure is such that there's really not any attention paid to these. We don't have a ministry or department of the future.
Right.
Politicians tend to think in terms of 3 or 4 years and getting reelected.
Right. Okay. Well, you keep taking me from like a little bit of hope to total despair again. But what do you tell your kids, or what do you recommend people do at this point who are listening to this conversation and are like inspired? What do you
Just read more about it. I mean, again, despair and hope is as much a manifestation of one's personality, I think. I mean, it's to me, this sounds sort of perverse. There's a pleasure's the right word, but there's a gratification knowing that I know more about the way things are than I did yesterday. I
Mhm.
love reading nonfiction. Almost everything I read is nonfiction, just because to me it's fascinating learning new stuff. And
Mhm.
learning new stuff, this is why I like being a diplomat, about stuff that matters, right, is even better. So, this is why I spend so much time reading about climate change and climate justice, which is an important issue because it's sort of the pixels in the picture fill in. You're getting more and more pixels. You're getting a more granular feel for what's going on. And, a lot of it's just proselytizing. A lot of it is like, for example, I went to a college yesterday, a friend of mine, and he asked me to talk about climate change as a national security issue. Well,
Yeah.
I sat in front of a class of young people for, an hour, and we talked about climate change as a national security issue. So, you never know what's going to work. It's not like even with AI, we're going to get a printout that says to avoid bad things happening, do A, B, C, D, E, right? You just have
Mhm.
to, you just have to know where you are, the time you have. Like I've got a lot of time now. I'm retired, right? So I got lots of free time. So I can devote a lot of time to this. So, writing or talking to people. And I mean, it's sort of flippant, insouciant to say it's fun because again, these are, yeah, like you said, these are things that are potentially very depressing, but you know, Robert Frost had a great poem. I forget what it's called, but he says, what, when work is play for mortal stakes, so you're playing for mortal stakes. So yeah, I mean, it's something worth spending one's time on, I think.
Okay. Well, thank you for talking to us about it, and,
How am I leaving your emotional state right now? I wanna leave you in a good place. I'll keep I'll keep talking until you feel better. I don't wanna leave you there.
I don't know because I have climate anxiety. I have, like, I mean, even just when I was telling you about the summer of
Yeah,
2011 here in Austin, where it was just so depressing
uh,
and so sad to see that sun coming out all the time. So I spent, 2 summers ago in New York City the whole summer, and that was great and the weather was good. But if I'm coming back to a city full of depressed people and they didn't all get to leave, like, I'm
yeah,
like, "What's the point?"
yeah,
Like, these are my people, and I left them, and I had kind of like survivor's guilt too. And I just felt like, I read about Ahvaz that you're talking
oh,
about. My
yeah,
family's from Ahvaz.
yeah,
So they talk about, my family who's in Texas now is like, it's not that bad, and Ahvaz was really hot. And I look it up. I have Ahvaz's weather on my weather app, and it reaches 120,
crazy
130.
there. Yeah,
But
yeah,
I've been reading, about the current state of the environment in Iran right now, and that's
mm,
so depressing because first of all, they're, like, jailing and killing all the environmentalists. That's a huge political issue in Iran.
yeah,
And but then, like, Ahvaz is becoming uninhabitable, like you said, the dust, the
yeah,
smoke, the pollution on top of the weather. Back then, they had coping mechanisms. They had these houses with courtyards and fountains,
yeah,
and
yeah,
the heat was hot, but they coped with it,
yeah.
and they had weather systems in their homes that would, ventilate the air really nicely. So the coping mechanisms are becoming less, and so it's like not only is the climate changing, it's like we're creating hell on earth in so many different ways. And so to leave it on a positive note, that's what, and all the, like, wars that we have right now that are creating so much pollution. It's just it feels like there's so much happening outside of my control. Like, I would love to feel empowered to do something, but I feel like personal empowerment, it's like everybody has to be okay for it to be okay.
Do you know the Zen koan, "Tigers above, tigers below"?
No.
Okay, so I read a lot about Buddhism, Zen stuff. So there's a guy walking out in the, nature, and he sees a tiger behind him who's coming up on him, and he's at the edge of a cliff. So he jumps over the cliff and grabs onto a branch, right? Now it's not a deep cliff, he would survive the fall, right? So the tiger's leaning over the cliff, growling at him. He looks below on the ground where he would land if he lets go of the branch, and there's another tiger growling, waiting for him, right? So then he looks at the branch he's holding on to, and there's a mouse nibbling at the root, which is getting more and more afraid, right? Tigers above, tigers below. And then he sees right next to the branch, there's a strawberry, like, bush or something. And he takes out a strawberry, puts it in his mouth and eats it, and it tastes good. He totally just focuses on the taste and he enjoys eating the strawberry. That's what that's one of the things I think about a lot. It's like things can be horrible before, they can be horrible after, but if you just focus on the present moment, you can derive joy or happiness, whatever. So, tigers above, tigers below.
All right. I think that's really nice. I do appreciate that.
Okay, hope that works.
And also it's better to know, bringing it back to our poem, "On casque bedānad va bedānad." So, it's important for us to get the knowledge that we need. Well, going back to the highest form, "On casque bedānad va bedānad ke bedānad."
Yeah, we all have to
We can
strive toward that.
exactly, exactly. All right. Well, like I said, we'll have two other lessons where we go over each of these words individually so that we can add to our Persian vocabulary as always. And Alan, thank you so much for talking with us and talking about something that you're really passionate about. I would love to hear more about climate change, and hopefully people will listen to this. And I'll have a link to that Uninhabitable Earth. And although I don't want to read it,
Yeah, well, there are other books. There's tons of books out there. Maybe don't start with that one.
okay, with my climate anxiety. Yeah, what should I start with?
I'll send you a list. I got literally I have a whole wall of books on this stuff.
Okay, please send me a list. We're all on this earth together.
Cool. Bani Adam Azai Yektigaran. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's actually the next poem I'm going to record again because I we did that poem with our boot camp about a year ago,
Yeah.
and with everything that's been happening in the world, I feel like I've had to reiterate that poem over and over again because
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like it was radical when it was written,
Yeah.
and it's still somehow a radical concept now, and I cannot fathom how. I feel like
Yeah.
that's the end all be all. It's just like just read this poem.
Exactly. They say that it's on the wall at the UN, and I've never really looked for it hard at the UN, but I'd love to go see it at the UN.
Yeah, well, it's in a, tiny part of a rug apparently, so you really have to look hard for it.
I'm going to leave you now and go back to my limping donkey.
Alright, thank you again.
Take care. Bye bye.